So in this segment, we're going to be talking about, quote, we're only seeing the negative, unquote, UK farmers on Brexit and losing the common agricultural policy. So we've spoken previously about how farmers have been impacted by the end of subsidies and the Tories not replacing them properly, but this farmer kind of lays it out a bit more in a bit more in-depth way from someone who actually works in the industry. So Ian Rickman ponders the damage Brexit has done to his future. 2 years since the UK quit the EU, the future for mountain sheep farmers such as him is full of economic precarity. Farmers have had a turbulent time since Brexit fully happened. They lost some of their subsidies and it'll only get worse for them from here on out. So he lost unfettered access to his nearest export market, faces reduction in farm subsidies as the result of the loss of the Common Agricultural Policy (CAP), and has been disadvantaged by trade deals giving access to the UK market to rival farmers from Australia and New Zealand. They went from take back control to we'll keep the and obviously we'll keep the EU as a trading partner and get the rest of the world, of course, will replace the cap subsidies, to losing most of it. We still don't know what the future holds for these subsidies. So they went from take back control, we'll keep trading with the EU, of course we will, no one threatening our place in the single market, to losing our export market and then competing with the rest of the world on our own front. From a sheep farmer's point of view, there's no good outcome from these trade deals, says Rickman. He's right. But the farmers should have known better. They should really know who their key markets were, and one of those would be the EU. But now these trade deals really open them up for a lot of competition from agricultural powerhouses. They should have listened to the NFU, the National Farmers Union. Their predominant international markets, so New Zealand and Australia, are China and the Far East. Why give them access to the UK? At the moment we are fine, but if for some reason there were, God forbid, a Ukraine type situation in the Far East and sanctions imposed overnight, they will use the huge access to our market. And obviously the trade deals haven't really kicked in yet, so he's saying we're fine, but you're fine because the trade deal hasn't come into effect. Took me about a minute to understand what he was talking about, but I think he's talking about if China invaded Taiwan. Similar to Russia invading Ukraine, China would probably face massive sanctions. New Zealand and Australia would lose China as an export market, so they would look to export more to the UK. This would damage British farmers a lot, as they would face a lot of competition from rival farmers who can farm cheaper, who have lower costs. There's no way you can dress these trade deals up as a good thing. I've heard farmers say the industry was more or less chucked under a bus, and media from New Zealand I think were laughing at us pretty viciously. It's not on, guys. Yet these farmers rarely speak out. Farmers traditionally vote Tory. Why they're not holding their local MPs accountable, trying to do the media rounds. Even the NFU haven't been the loudest on this. A new study by the statutory levy body, the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, has concluded that New Zealand exports to the UK would rise by about 13,000 tonnes, so 31%, if China imposed a 25% tariff on New Zealand lamb exports, and 29,000 tonnes, 69%, if there was an outright ban. So, if there was some sort of war breaking out between, or if China did invade Taiwan, for example, you're going to see a massive increase in exports of lamb and other kinds of agricultural produce to the UK from New Zealand and Australia. And this would be a nightmare for farmers, but most of this meat will be frozen. However, that frozen meat will probably be sold for ready meals and other processed foods. This will cut into the farmers' margins, but this is only under a scenario where China invades Taiwan and the West put sanctions on China. Both would be a nightmare scenario, which makes them unlikely, but the UK-New Zealand deal opens us up for such damage to our agricultural industry. Energy prices for everyone are going through the roof, while at the same time the cost of selling to the EU, which represents about 33% of the lamb export market, has also spiralled. You're talking about a third. So they export a third of their lamb to the EU, and that export got a lot more expensive. You need export paperwork, which can cost a lot and is time consuming. Time fresh meat does not have. Plus the importer needs to do their own paperwork. I'm not sure how big sheep farming is in the EU, but it got a lot more expensive for them to import products. You can argue, well, they can just sell more within GB, but more supply can mean pushing prices and margins down. Also, we don't know if the demand will be there within GB anyways. I think people in the UK eat more beef and chicken more than just lamb. I mean, we're an island that doesn't eat a lot of fish. A cross-industry veterinary and environmental health group, the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Certification Working Group, there are so many of these groups, estimate that the new requirement for export health certificates signed off by a vet added £60 million to the cost of food exports to Europe in 2021. That's a cost paid on both sides of the border and makes trade very prohibitive. Also, finding the vets can be difficult. We have a shortage of vets too, but it costs much more for the EU to import the lamb we produce, a £60 million added cost. Madness. It hasn't been doomsday, but is also a question of more and more problems being added to trade, said Beb. Brexit barriers are so unnecessary and for so little gain. Hate to tell you this, but this is the Brexit the country voted for. I don't know if he voted for Brexit, but we know most farmers did, and also that most farmers vote Tory, so not much sympathy here. Mountain farming is a tough business, with many hill farmers unable to survive without subsidies, threatening not just livelihoods but also the presence of a farmer as pastoral keeper of the land, which in Rickman's case is part of the Wales National Parks. And before returning to the subject of Brexit, Rickman talks about the importance of sheep grazing the uplands to keep grasses down, minimising the risk of climate change, wildfires, with a tinder detritus building up. And this is what they mean by when they call some farmers custodians of the land. Their sheep will eat grass that potentially makes wildfires less likely and keep the land tidier, which is important for land management. So this goes beyond just farming produce. It's about a public service. At least farmers might push that narrative. Rickman explains how his farming sector has been cushioned from the worst effects of Brexit, as inflation has driven up the cost of red meat. And this is an odd statement in my opinion. The farmers' input costs and energy costs have gone up dramatically, which will eat into their profits, unless somehow his profit margins have gone up. I don't know how inflation would help him. Someone in the comments must know, right? Figures from 2020 to 2021 show income for cattle farmers and sheep farming in less favourable areas up 32% to 29,900. In other years, it's been dangerously low. In 2017, the president of the FUW said it had dipped to 13,000, less than half of the national average wage. And I'm surprised they're financially doing better given the last few years that we've seen. But what was happening in 2017 to sheep and cattle farmers for them to be in such a bad financial situation? Brexit, the government said, was about giving farmers for the first time in 50 years the chance to do things differently. And, doing things differently is not always better. If I go from walking across the street looking both ways and very slowly, that would be one way to do it. The other way is running across the road like I think I'm Barry Allen. Yeah, it's different, but it's not actually better. Big George Eustace, the then Environment Secretary, asserted in 2020 that it makes no sense to subsidise land ownership and tenure where the largest subsidy payments often go to the wealthiest landowners. Among the cap beneficiary payments, which were made per hectare, were the Brexiteer James Dyson, who received more than $5 million from the EU, and former Daily Mail editor Paul Dacre, who pocketed $88,000 from the Scottish Langwell estate. And it's weird that these two are Brexiteers, given they must have lost significant amounts of money. Here we kind of discuss the issues with CAP, which can go to landowners who make money just from owning land and doing nothing with the land. Maybe that's a conversation the EU can have. We can debate the benefits of this in the comments. But the National Farmers Union and the FUW fear for the small farmers who are dependent on CAP. MPs on the Welsh Affairs Committee expressed concern in 2022 that around a fifth of Welsh farms had a farm business income of less than zero, with an average income of £26,000 per farm. Government research shows that the subsidy is the difference between profit and loss for 42% of farms, and so these farms without the government funding are insolvent. Some of these farms run at a loss without subsidies. That's probably down to the high costs, but also purchasing power of supermarkets and other buyers. But given that they have damaged the sales to a major export market for them, this will only get worse combined with the lower subsidies they will get. And it kind of gives supermarkets a lot more power because they can demand a much lower price now, because they can ask the farmers, who are you going to sell to? You ain't selling anywhere else but to us. CAP was launched in 1962 as a partnership between agriculture and society. The CAP was envisioned as an income support mechanism after research showed farmers' income was 40% lower than non-agricultural incomes. So, it's clearly untenable. Food security is very important for nation states. Bad harvests or war can decimate countries. Look at the cost of something like sunflower oil. Russia's invasion of Ukraine means that there is a complete shortage. This is why farming is really important. In a crisis, you can cap or even stop all exports of essential food. This is why having farming subsidies can be important. Food security is very, very important, especially in developing countries, but even in developed countries. I don't get government support, EU subsidy, and then squirrel it away in my Swiss bank account and go off to Barbados, the farmer said. That doesn't happen. That money goes straight out of the local business, says Rickman, referring to the vet, the mechanic, the feed supplier, and the fence contractor. Farming is the backbone of the rural economy. The progressive phasing out of the cap system has left farmers at least 20% down this year, and they will be short by 50% of the previous EU subsidy in 2024, with the remaining money due to be reinvested in farming under the public money for public goods policy. By 2028, the practice of subsidising farmers per acre will have been eliminated, the government says, and it's not a worse thing that the UK is reforming the subsidy system. However, given that farmers are going to receive half the money they used to receive from the EU structural funds, no amount of restructuring the subsidies will help that. They could have done something positive here, but instead they broke another promise and put the UK's food security and farm areas at risk, and most farmers voted for this. Sad times for them. Farmers in England are now receiving less support, quite significantly, so that will impact income, says Nick von Westenholz, the Director of Trade and Business Strategy at the NFU. Most farmers still don't know what they'll be signing up to in future years, or what they'll have to do to meet requirements of any new scheme, he says. And the government has not announced what kinds of hoops farmers will have to jump through. In fact, they can get rid of most, if not all, of the subsidies if they want to. No one could really stop them. What are the farmers going to do? Protest? Regarding claims that British farming was put at risk by trade deals, a DEFRA spokesperson said, the interests of farmers and food producers is a high priority for our trade policy. That's a lie. And our trade deals are delivering on this. Our negotiations will continue to support farmers. And it's a lie because George Eustace, the former head of DEFRA, said this was not the case, that the UK-Australia deal is not good for British farming. But let's take stock of the situation. Farmers have lost trade with a key export market, the EU. 33% of lamb farmed in the UK was exported to the EU. That's at risk. Subsidies have been cut. Lack of staff on farms due to no freedom of movement. A lack of butchers because we don't train enough people in this country. A lack of logistics staff because, again, we don't train enough people in this country. Future competition from Australia and New Zealand because of the new trade deals. This is the situation for British farming. The game looks like it's up for them. Let's not forget the rising energy costs as well, and the rising input costs. Things like hilltop farming, among other types of farming, could be dead soon, and that's just sad, but they knew what they were voting for, right? But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.